All right, so we're going to give you some more examples. We're going to look at another historical anachronism concerning chainmail and then the crucifixion itself. Whoa, crucifixion is not only confusing in the Quran, the one crucifixion they should have got, they didn't. Stay with us. We'll show you why.
Hello everyone, this is Fadi, and with me here in studio, Dr. J. Smith, and we are continuing with our study or research on what we call historical anachronisms related to the contents of the Quran. We have covered a number of false historical claims made by the Quran. For instance, one found in chapter 17. Another one is found in another chapter, chapter 20, dealing with the existence of the Samaritans during the time of Moses, or what we call the existence of the Dome of the Rock, or an Islamic mosque in general in Jerusalem during the time when Muhammad did his ascension to heaven. So all that to say is that those events, while they might be listed in the Quran, that doesn't make them accurate historically speaking. Today, we are going to take a look at another one of those examples. And with me here, of course, in studio to do so is Dr. J. Smith. So, Jay, what else do we have here by way of examples of errors and historical anachronisms?
Okay, let's now go to chapter 34 of the Quran. Let's go back to our slides, and there you'll see chapter 34, verse 10 to 11, which says this: "And we certainly gave David, and we made pliable for him iron, commanding him make full coats of mail and calculate precisely the links." Well, you can see, what is that referring to? That's chainmail, right? So obviously the question you'd ask is, did they have chainmail at the time of David, who was living about 1000 BC? No, they didn't. Why? Well, let's go back to the slides. We know that David lived there in 1000 BC. Coats of chainmail were not invented until 200 BC. 800 years later. So that's a huge problem. When, of course, when whoever wrote the Quran wrote this down, they didn't know this. They weren't aware of the fact that chainmail was not invented until 200 BC. So they assumed, therefore, that since they had it in the 9th and 10th century AD, they must have had it at the time of David. Mm-hmm. It's an easy mistake to make, but it also shows that Allah would not make this type of mistake. This is no longer in middle. This is a human error, which is normal. I can understand that. They didn't know their history. Let's go back to the slide and let's look at the next one. And this has to do with crucifixion. So when you look at the Quran, you will see that in chapter 7, verse 120 to 124, you have Pharaoh telling the sorcerers to use crucifixion. It says this: "Indeed, this is a conspiracy which you conspired in the city to expel therefrom its people. But you are going to know, I will surely cut off your hands and your feet on opposite sides. Then I will crucify you all." In chapter 20, so that's referring to Moses. This is repeated also in chapter 20, verse 71, which says, "You believed him before I gave you permission. Indeed, he is your leader who has taught you magic. So I will surely cut off your hands and your feet on opposite sides, and I will crucify you in the trunks of palm trees. And you will surely know which of us is more severe in giving punishment and more enduring." So you've seen at the time of Moses, who lived in 1400 BC, that there was crucifixion, quite normal there. The sorcerers of Pharaoh were not able to keep up with Moses, and so therefore they were sent to be crucified. If you go even another chapter, that's chapter 12, verse 41. Here you go back to the time of Joseph. Now we're going to 1800 BC. So we're going even further back, another 400 years earlier. And it says, "O two companions of the prison, as for one of you, he will pour out wine for his lord to drink. And as for the other, he will be crucified." So at the time of Joseph, when he's there in prison in Egypt, the guy that is in prison with him is going to be crucified. Crucifixions that are happening there in 1800 BC and in 1400 BC. Let's look at the slide again. You see there's some problems with this. Why? Well, we know that Moses lived in 1447. Joseph lived in around 1800 BC. Crucifixions were not even used in Egypt at all to begin with. That's the first problem. It's the wrong country. But they were first introduced in 500 BC. And you can
by
see,
the Romans,
actually by the Lydians, who then the Romans took it from.
Yeah.
And then you can understand that the Quran's crucifixions are in the wrong place. They're over 1,000 to 1,300 years too early. You can't have them that early. That's why it's important that we look at history and we know that the crucifixions did not exist before the Lydians introduced them. The Romans took it from the Lydians and they used the same persecution. But that doesn't help the Qur'an any, because obviously whoever wrote the Qur'an, we know that this proof this is man-made, this is man-written.
And I want to say, I mean, this what makes the prophecy about the crucifixion of Christ in Isaiah 53 even the more powerful, because it was predicted 200 years before the implementation of such technique by the Romans.
Bingo. So let's go to that one next. Let's go
and I want to say one more thing here. When it comes to, at least let's look at chapter 20, verse 71, the idea of cutting basically their hands and legs from opposite sides. That's a technique used by the Sharia law, by the way, for highway robbery. You read about that in chapter 5 of the Quran, verse 33. So it seemed like there is an Islamic tone to it in here.
Islamic tone. That's fascinating, because that chapter 5, verse 33 follows chapter 5, verse 32, which Muslims believe is a benign, showing that they're a peace-loving. That has only to do with Jews, whereas chapter 5, verse 33 has to do with you and me. Very clear that if we do not stand against Allah and His Prophet, we must be crucified and have our hands and feet cut off. Let's go back up to the slides again, and let's look at the one place. Now, they got this wrong. The one place they should have got crucifixions right would be with the person of Jesus Christ. But when you get to the story of Jesus Christ, it completely denies that one crucifixion, what it should have got right, because now it has been written after this event happened. You see a problem here? So in chapter 4, verse 157, and for their saying it says, "Indeed, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, and they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. But another was made to resemble him to them. And indeed, those who differ over it are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it except the following of assumption. And they did not kill him, for certain." Now, here's the problem, Al-Fadi. Where the Quran has been written in the 8th and 9th century AD, redacting it and looking back to an event that happened in the 1st century. So they're after the event. They should have got this one right, because it's all over the world. Everybody knows about it. And you would ask, to really know whether or not this event did happen, shouldn't you go back to that period? Let's see if they're correct on this. So the best thing to do is go back to the historians from that time period. So let's do that. Let's look at the slide again, and let's see what we find. When we look at the slide, we can go back to the historical record, and we go to people like Thales and Phlegon. These are two Greek satirists who are having a debate in 52 AD. And in the middle of the debate, they're bringing up this whole problem about this guy that just got crucified 20 years earlier in 33 AD, or 19 years earlier. And they're talking about his death. And they're mentioning that on the day he died, the earth shook and the sun went dark. So it's obvious that both Thales and Phlegon, who were not Christians, these are just two satirists, Greek satirists, were arguing this. And they just were bringing this up they knew it was a historical event. Within 20 years, they knew this was a historical event. Let's go back to the slide again. Look at Lucian, who's another Greek satirist. He writes in the 2nd century about the crucifixion. Mara ben Sarapin, who writes his Letter to Pagan, he writes in 73 AD about the crucifixion. Then we go to Josephus, who is a Jewish historian living in Rome. He's writing between 30 AD and 90 AD, so he's in the 1st century. Some say that he may have been written this in the 2nd century. Nonetheless, he's still right up at the same time. Here's a Jewish historian, and he's not only talking about the death of Jesus and the crucifixion, he mentions that the brother of Jesus also was killed. And interestingly, he also mentions that the Christians believe that Jesus rose from the dead. The only reference we have for the resurrection is also from Josephus, though he doesn't agree with it himself. He says the Christians believe this. Go back to the slides, and let's end with Tacitus. Tacitus is a Roman historian, had nothing good to say about Christians.
He hated Christians.
Absolutely detested them. But he does say that, and he's writing within the 1st century, up until the early 2nd century, and he mentions not only that Jesus died, but he tells us when he died, under the authority of Pilate, who was under the authority of Tiberius. That's why we know it's in 33 AD, because of Tacitus. Now, go back to the slide again. Notice what we're saying here. Greek, Roman, Jewish historians from the 1st and 2nd century all agree that it was Jesus who was on the cross. Now, these are outside. These are hostile historians, hostile witnesses, I guess the best way to put it. They are not Christians. But they all agree with the biblical account of those who were there. And remember, who was there? Well, John was there. He was at the foot of the cross. Don't you think he would have known who that man was on the cross? He'd been with him for 3 years.
Right.
And Mary was there. She was at the foot of the cross. She had known him for 33 years. She was his mother. Don't you think she would have known her own son? And what about the man on the cross? If he had been put, another image had been put on this man, don't you think he would have said something?
No kidding.
Look at what he said on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Into your hands I commend my spirit. Does that sound like a man who doesn't know who he is or is the wrong man?
Or I somehow magically transformed and accepted his fate all of a sudden.
Can you see? Coming and going. The Qur'an, it really has a historical knack. When it says that he did not die and another was given his image, they thought it was so. They thought it was he who was on the cross. When you get that from the 8th and 9th century, because this is we don't have chapter 4, verse 157 in the earliest manuscripts. It's in later manuscripts. So it's probably an 8th century or 9th century edition. If that is the case, who are you going to trust? Are you going to go to the people who are actually there? Are you going to go to the historians who were there at that time, even the hostile historians? Or are you going to go to a book that was written 600 to 700 to 800 years later? I would go with the Bible, and I would go.
I think what you mean is that earlier Quranic manuscripts, at least that we know of, don't have that verse.
Don't have this verse, which seems to be a later edition.
Well, I don't know. You mean like it was inserted?
Inserted at a later time. Because you have chapter 19, verse 33, which does have Jesus referring to the fact, blessed be me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I rise again. So he's talking about it as a child. And then you have chapter 3, verse 55, that also has Allah saying to Jesus, the day I killed you, I actually killed you.
Of course, there are so many debates about how this is interpreted. Sadly, you start advancing in a study of the commentaries, and they come up with these weird explanations of mutawafika and what Jesus meant by his statement, because John the Baptist earlier in the same chapter 19, said exact same formula, but somehow John the Baptist died, Jesus did not.
There you go.
Yeah. So what I wanted to say here, one last thing before we close. Here is my theory also, and I've done a lot of shows on this, and I think I'm going to do another series on the crucifixion in English and in Arabic. But what I wanted to say is this: the fact that the author of the Quran took the time to write something about the crucifixion, regardless of how he presented it, it means something happened, except the author of the Quran wants to deny it. That's all.
It looks like this is a polemic, nothing more.
Exactly. All right, folks. Well, I think you have gotten the flavor now of the covering of these topics. So we're going to try our best to keep it to 2 historical events per show, to make it easy for you, of course, to use and share it with others. And my hope is that you will utilize it in your witness to our Muslim friends. Until next episode, have a blessed day. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment. And ring the bell so you will be notified when we release new content. Our mission is to reach Muslims with the gospel of Jesus Christ and help Christians engage with their Muslim neighbors. If you want to join us in this life-changing work, please support us on patreon.com/CIRA International, or just click on the link below.